So, good morning. Thank you so much for waiting. Sorry to keep you waiting for a few moments. I'm Dan Thomas. I'm the Communication Director for the President of the General Assembly. I'm going to introduce the panel and then hand over. So we've got the President of the General Assembly, Peter Thomson, Dr. Justine Cassell from Carnegie Mellon University, Dr. Peter Diamandis from the X Prize Foundation and Singularity University, and Dr. Astro, the CEO of Google X. And without further ado, let me hand over to the President of the General Assembly, Peter Thomson.
Morning, everybody. You're probably wondering why I'm wearing a Guayabera instead of the suit that I've been wearing for the last 8 years here. This is meant to be a disruptive day, a day when we think differently. And it's all about implementing SDGs and how we can apply technology and innovation to that task. As you know, 71st session of the United Nations, all about implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is part of a series of SDG action events. We had the first on linking SDGs and sustaining peace. We went to SDGs and climate change. Now we have SDG and innovation and connectivity. And we're moving on to SDGs and education as the next one. But today, it's all about focusing our minds on how can we apply the exponential growth of innovation, technology, connectivity to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've put together a day which I hope you can all participate in, of some of the world's leading thinkers and innovators. And I'm sure you want to hear from them rather than boring old me, so I'm going to ask Dan to introduce them to you. Thanks a lot for coming.
Any questions? Anyone want to ask a question? Over there, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For many poor countries, it's really difficult to access to those technologies. So what can be done on this issue?
Yeah, Astro.
I think if the others can just say a few quick words and then we'll take some questions. But Dr. Astro from the CEO of Google X has been giving a very good example of how the balloon technology of connectivity was a huge help to Peru during the recent floods, which wouldn't otherwise have been possible. But Dan, could we just introduce the others and then take questions? Yeah.
Actually, Venezuela is being talked today at the Security Council. Has the General Assembly have talked or have presented a proposal to try to get the subject of Venezuela to the General Assembly to have a broad conversation?
Okay, that's not the subject of this. Just carry on.
Astro, why don't you talk a little bit about how developing countries can have access to this technology?
Sure. So this isn't the only answer, but your question was, for poorer countries, how can they participate in some of the newest technologies? And one of the opportunities, think of it as a resource that some countries have that others don't, which is a lack of bureaucracy or a seriousness about finding safe ways to sandbox new technologies. You would be surprised, but the ability to try new technologies out in a country, in any country, makes that country and testing in that country much more attractive to technologists. So to the extent that our self-driving cars, our self-flying vehicles, our balloons, the things that we do in healthcare can be safely and appropriately explored in a particular country when there are often various reasons why they can't yet in this country. That makes it appealing to us, and we actually have done a lot of our testing of various things outside the United States exactly for this reason. So we appreciate the hard work that the regulators in the United States do with us, but we also very much appreciate the hard work that regulators in other countries do to create these safe, rapid ways for us to learn with them. And I think that that then creates the opportunity for those countries to become leaders in those new technologies.
Can I ask a question about Google? I heard your presentation about the balloon. So one is sort of, earlier this year in Cameroon, a country in Africa, the internet was cut off for 94 days. There were many people trying to work around it, bring back our internet. I'm wondering, you seem to say you could only provide these services, obviously, with consent. What could you do about places where the internet's not available? And also, what does Google do to make sure that it lives up to, say, human rights standards as it partners with the UN? I'm aware that there are governments that use the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to get criticism of them taken down. There doesn't seem to be. Yeah. Is there any specific? Given that you're here?
I understand the spirit
okay.
of the question. Let me first make it clear that we are sort of a sibling, a sort of little brother to Google. We are not Google. X is a separate business and has its own sort of ethos and goals. So I don't speak for Google, and you shouldn't interpret things I say as speaking for Google. That said, what I would say is think of what Loon is trying to do as creating invisible threads through the sky, connecting people in rural areas to the internet service providers in that country. So for us to be effective, there needs to be an internet service provider, or possibly more than one, in a country that is ready to receive those invisible threads through the sky so that they can bring on these new people. So we have a technology solution to provide, but there would need to be someone on the ground in a country ready to work with us, and the government of the country would need to be signed up for at least overflight of these balloons in order for us to help.
There's a question over here. So, yeah, ask your question. Yeah.
Yes, I guess this is for anyone, but particularly Google X. You're talking about expanding interconnectivity in fulfillment of the SDGs, but there's also a flip side, a dark side to this, as we've seen recently with the spread of malware. So are you also, or are you aware, sort of accompanying what you're trying to do positively, of the development of robust defensive measures to prevent the abuse of this interconnectivity, which actually is hurting the global economy, but also may hurt the most those countries that are starting to interconnect?
What I would say is you have just flagged very generally cybersecurity as a serious problem in the world that probably needs to be ranked alongside of things like literacy and hunger and connectivity and clean energy as one of the world's serious problems. And inasmuch as that's what we do, we try to find huge problems in the world and then find unusual and unusually effective ways to solve it. We would love to solve that problem, just like we would love to solve the food production problems of the world. And as soon as we have a solution on that front that we're done enough to tell you about, I look forward to telling you about it.
No, just a very quick follow-up. That's fine, except that your work is expanding the scope of interconnectivity and then potentially exponentially expanding the potential threat from abuse of that interconnectivity. So wouldn't it make sense, maybe as part of the SDGs in this area, in parallel to develop defensive mechanisms to prevent their abuse?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Dr. Diamandis, would you like to have a crack at the question about developing countries using this technology?
So the reality is that technology is growing widespread and is reducing in cost. This is what happens constantly. Today's cell phone, when it was very expensive, cost $1 million a pop and did not work very well, that's when it was being used by Wall Street billionaires. Now that it's cheap and works extraordinarily well, now it's being used by the entire world. This is what happens over and over again. So we see these devices globally, and the work that X is doing, the work that other technologists around the world are doing in providing high-speed connectivity, much better than when we had connectivity early on. These devices will ultimately be the mechanism by which we provide the best healthcare in the world, the best education in the world. We're heading towards a time where the education of the son or daughter of a billionaire and the education of the poorest child on the planet will be identical, delivered by artificial intelligence. It will be a time when the best health care in the world for the rich and the poor is identical, because these things are the directions that we're heading. I think that ultimately the most important change that's occurring over this next decade, the change that people are not talking about, is this massive global connectivity that's coming our way, both terrestrial with 5G networks, in the stratosphere with balloons, and in low Earth orbit by a number of satellite communications. And when people have a megabit or better, it gives them access to the world's information on Google. It's giving them access to the world's best education, the best healthcare on the planet. And ultimately, a nation is going to find that its people are its entrepreneurs, right? One of the, well, I won't go in, I'll pause out there. I mean, I will say that we have Rob Nail here, who's my partner, CEO of Singularity University. This is what we teach, that today a kid with access to this technology, independent of where they live, can start a company or an organization to change the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And let's just hear from Professor Cassell from Carnegie Mellon as well.
So with all due respect, I want to disagree with one of Peter's points. He said that the education of a millionaire in one part of the world and a wealthy part of the world and the education of the poorest child in the poorest area of the world will be identical. No, what we hope for is that they will be equally good, but that they will not be identical. Because part of the strategic development goals is to maintain dignity in each country, to understand the context in which development happens in each country. And context is key, as is human-centric development. So I'm going to be talking this afternoon about a human-centric development perspective of technology, a context in which we first understand what it means to be a person, what we care most about. Connectivity, not just connectivity between satellites and cell phones, but connectivity between people, communications, relationships that are strong and viable, and that we take those into account as we develop technology, that therefore does not replace humans in their jobs, but collaborates with them so that the technology does what it does best and the human does what he or she does best. That, for me, is the future of exponential growth in technology, an education that is equally good, but that is situated in the complex context of the countries in which it exists.
Thank you so much. So thank you very much. Our speakers have got to go back into the chamber. They've already started. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your interest, and please continue watching the event or coming to the event. Thank you. Thank you so much.